might be a little too dark for the Marvel Universe. When she loses her mind, it's my favorite thing in the comics.
Even after being hit with Marvel fatigue post-Endgame, I was genuinely excited about WandaVision for a couple of reasons. One, Wanda is one of my favorite characters in the MCU, which can be credited to Avengers Infinity War. Watching her make the tough choice to kill Vision, and only turning out to be for nothing, has allowed me to sympathize with her even more than before. Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany have great chemistry, and it felt like Vision was killed off too soon. Considering that Vision is powered by the Mind Stone, I had a strong feeling that he would be killed off, so it made sense story-wise. The show has definitely solidified Wanda and Vision as two of my favorite characters in the MCU. The other reason is that the show is setting up Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is one of the few new MCU movies I'm looking forward to, especially with Sam Raimi directing, because when he has proper creative control, he can make a good comic book movie. My only question or concern is how much creative control will be present for Multiverse of Madness, because continuity will definitely be something that needs to be maintained, but I'm sure it will at least be a fun movie. I do advise you have patience, because given that it's so drastically different from your usual Marvel flick, audience members on the fence might be willing to opt out early. Now, before I get into the review, if there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the show and you want to watch with as little knowledge as possible, I suggest you click away. You have been warned. With the exception of introducing us to Agnes and Vision's workplace, the plot for the first episode doesn't really contribute much to the story, but it has some great slapstick comedy as Wanda and Vision try to get dinner ready for Mr. and Mrs. Hart while simultaneously having to hide their powers. I absolutely love the 60s intro for the second episode, and it's definitely the catchiest theme. The first half is a bit slow, but does introduce us to Geraldine, who turns out to be Monica Rambeau outside of Wanda's reality, along with giving us hints that something's not right. Drunk Vision is quite possibly the funniest thing the MCU has given us, as Wanda tries to improvise and not ruin their chances of winning the talent show. Normally, someone acting this out of character might be considered a flaw, but something we have to remember here is that this isn't the real Vision. I must also add that I'm genuinely impressed with how funny Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany are. Honestly, this show alone is probably funnier than the movies. The third episode is mainly focused on Wanda's pregnancy, along with Vision beginning to realize that something's not right. I remember when Vision began to express his concerns about people's odd behavior, and it was done to express his concerns about parenthood. I honestly thought it was just my Wi-Fi or Disney Plus acting up, but no, it was Wanda altering her reality. There is still some good comedy along with an occasional dad pun from Vision. While this was one of the least engaging episodes, it got interesting really quickly after Ultron is mentioned and Vision learns that Geraldine isn't a resident of Westview. Unlike Spider-Man Far From Home, the fourth episode does a good job of portraying the severity of how chaotic everything was after everyone who was snapped away came back 5 years later. It also does a good job of filling in what was happening while Wanda is living in the reality she created, along with introducing us to Sword and director Tyler Hayward. Not only do we also get to see that Darcy Lewis from the first two Thor movies and Jimmy Woo from Ant-Man and the Wasp have been brought in to figure out what's going on, we also learn what happened to Monica after she mentioned Ultron to Wanda. It was definitely an odd combination of characters. If you thought episode 4 was interesting, then you're going to love episode 5. Things only continue to get interesting as Vision becomes more aware of what's happening as Agnes continues to conveniently come over with exactly what they need. Another interesting thing to notice is that Wanda is not in full control of everything, as Tommy and Billy show signs of having their own powers, especially after aging up twice. Meanwhile, we get our side story with Monica, Jimmy, and Darcy as Hayward gives us information about what happened with Wanda at Sword headquarters. I think what makes Monica a likable character is how she's a stand-in for the audience as she tries to sympathize with Wanda and defends her after Hayward brands her as a terrorist. It reminds me a lot of what makes Lowry in Jurassic World such a great character, because just like him, Monica pretty much speaks for the audience, or at least says what we're thinking. Even though it was only for one scene, the acting by Asif Ali was brilliant as he was able to change emotions so drastically from panicky to calm as if he merely flipped a switch. It was also interesting to have Wanda potentially going rogue and even having her Sokovian accent make a return after Hayward attempted to kill her with a drone. The tension between Wanda and Vision is well executed as he finally decides to confront Wanda about what she's been doing after she's been playing it off as nothing and even tries cutting the credits to avoid talking about it. It was definitely a surprise to see an angry Vision, and I think Paul Bettany nailed it. What I appreciate about this scene is how, unlike Wonder Woman 1984, WandaVision takes the time to point out that taking people and using them to play along to their fantasy is wrong, but is cut off by a surprise guest.
Alan!
All joking aside, I was honestly surprised to see Evan Peters make an appearance as Pietro. I honestly thought they were bringing back Aaron Taylor Johnson, and that reveal would have been just as great because I felt like we could have had some heartfelt moments between him and Wanda. With the appearance of Evan Peters as Quicksilver, I thought it would be the beginning of seeing the X-Men being introduced in the MCU through the multiverse. Don't get too excited because, spoiler alert, it isn't. One of the things I noticed in episode 6 was how Vision was able to lie to Wanda as he continues to try to find out what's going on. This little bit of detail is interesting because it feels like a subtle hit that Wanda is continuing to lose control of reality, or it could be that Wanda just wants to give Vision free will. The highlight of this episode was definitely seeing Wanda, Vision, and Quicksilver in their classic comic book outfits in the form of Halloween costumes. The Kick-Ass line is really funny when you factor in that both Aaron Taylor Johnson and Evan Peters are in a movie called Kick-Ass. Apparently this wasn't intentional, but I don't care. It was still funny. I love that they bring up Wanda's accent as a self-aware joke because it's something that a lot of people, including myself, have noticed. Especially in Age of Ultron, the accent's really strong, but at the end of Infinity War, it's almost non-existent. It's also interesting that Wanda isn't entirely sure on how she created her own reality in the first place, which helps the audience stay on their feet as they try to figure out the mystery of what happened. I also enjoyed seeing Vision go on his own little quest as he continues to see the negative effects of Wanda's reality. This episode really does a great job at establishing how selfless Vision is as he's willing to die to help the people of Westview. While it doesn't give us all of the answers and can be a bit slow, episode 7 begins to unravel what's going on. The thing this episode is best known for is the references to The Office and Modern Family as Wanda continues to spiral out of control. Wanda's mindset is well portrayed as her house constantly changes furniture from different decades. The interaction between Wanda and Monica was nice as well, and it's safe to say they're setting up Monica as Spectrum for future Marvel projects. I loved all of Vision's moments, especially his fourth wall breaks. Agnetha All Along was a nice catchy song, which isn't a surprise when we realize that it's written by the same people who gave us Let It Go and Show Yourself. It really didn't surprise me that Agnes was a villain. I mean, come on. She had the tendency to conveniently show up whenever Wanda needed something. She seemed to know more than your average citizen. She was even able to break the fourth wall in episode 5, asking Wanda if she wanted her to take it from the top. The signs were there from the beginning. Previously On is without a doubt the best episode in the show. I love a good character study, and it's one of the main reasons Batman Mask of the Phantasm is my favorite superhero movie, and why, despite its faults, I love Ang Lee's Hulk. Pretty much all of the questions we had from the past 7 episodes are finally answered, and the pieces to the puzzle are falling in place. We finally understand why Wanda chose sitcoms for reality and how she even managed to create it in the first place.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
As much as I love this episode, I do have to acknowledge some issues with it. Wanda was confirmed to be born in 1989, and her parents were killed when she was 10. Meeting their deaths happened in 1999. The Dick Van Dyke Show didn't get a DVD release until 2005, and Malcolm in the Middle didn't air until 2000. I don't know why they didn't just use cable to still show the Dick Van Dyke Show, but I mean, it is what it is. While this might be a small nitpick, it still feels out of place because the MCU is usually pretty good with this kind of stuff. Another critique, or question, is how did S.W.O.R.D. get a hold of Vision's body? Surely the Avengers would have wanted to prevent Vision from being exploited. Really wish we got an answer here. I am glad that Pietro's death is properly acknowledged because it's no secret that he was poorly utilized and killed off due to ownership issues before Disney acquired 20th Century Fox. While I don't think it's the greatest line in media history, what is grief if not love persevering is definitely the best line in the show because of how well it summarizes the theme of grief. I'm glad that Vision gets to be the one to deliver it because it's perfectly in character for him. I Can't Feel You was heartbreaking as well, and it's definitely one of the saddest moments in the MCU, along with being a nice callback to Infinity War. The thing I appreciate the most about Previously On is that the episode allows us to fully process Wanda's grief. With the exception of at least a couple of movies in the MCU, it seems like characters aren't allowed to properly grieve without having to implement the formulaic Marvel humor to keep the mood from being too dark and mature. The majority of my issues with WandaVision come in the last episode, which is honestly a shame because from what has been revealed, the show seemed to have been rushed and probably would have been better if they actually took the time to fully develop it. But, unfortunately, what's done is done. While I didn't have extremely high expectations, I will say that they were subverted in both good and bad ways. Even though I knew that Evan Peters wasn't the real Quicksilver, the fact that he was regulated to a boner joke was definitely a disappointment. While it's nowhere on the same level of awful as the Mandarin plot twist or Nick Fury losing his eye to a cat he just met, you can't deny that it's bad. I'm honestly baffled that the same writing team that gave us What Is Grief If Not Love Persevering also gave us a lazily written dick joke. Talk about total whiplash. Now, I have heard that the boner joke may have been a callback to a show called Growing Pains, but even if it was just poorly executed. Having Hayward try to murder kids comes out of nowhere, and it felt like the writers were trying too hard to sell him as a villain. I mean, more than before, when they seemed to just make him out as a dick just for the sake of it. He already lied about Wanda stealing Vision's body, and we see that he tried to get Wanda to recreate Vision so he could use his body for his own agenda. So he was already a villain and there was no need to have him go full Darth Vader. At least when Darth Vader murdered younglings, it was to show how far gone Anakin Skywalker was. Here, it just feels forced. An instance of my expectations being subverted in a good way was how White Vision was defeated. I honestly thought WandaVision were just going to destroy White Vision with their powers and that would be the end of it. Vision using his intellect to defeat an enemy was a nice change of pace instead of a typical throwdown while being completely within his character. I really like the scene where Wanda is confronted by the people of Westview and realizes the negative effects from reality while hesitating to get rid of it after seeing Vision and her kids dying from the removal. After all, this show is about her grief and coming to terms with Vision's death, so it's within character for her to hesitate losing a loved one again. The final fight between Wanda and Agnes was fun, and I love seeing her transform into the Scarlet Witch. While I do have my issues with the final episode, Wanda and Vision's final goodbye was a great, heartfelt moment, and it was definitely a nice way to end the show. What made her giving up reality more meaningful is that, again, unlike Wonder Woman 1984, she realized taking people and using them for her own purpose was wrong, and getting rid of the reality was the right thing to do. Wonder Woman did it just to get her powers back, and it's never properly acknowledged and swept under the rug. So in a way, even though Wanda was the anti-hero or villain of the show, she still feels more heroic than Wonder Woman, but I think that's more along the lines of how awful Wonder Woman 1984 is. I also appreciate that it wasn't a typical happy ending, but I do wish her apology were targeted towards the town instead of Monica. It felt weird because Monica was the person least hindered by Wanda's actions. I guess they were trying to maintain the sympathetic angle of the show through Monica, but they still could have had Wanda issue an apology to the town while keeping the final interaction between the two of them. I absolutely love the second after credits scene with Wanda, and I can't wait to see her in Multiverse of Madness.
It's probably just a case of the Mondays. Am I right?
Considering that the theme of WandaVision is about grief, I feel like this review would be incomplete if I didn't acknowledge how well the 5 Stages of Greif are presented in the show, as particular episodes are committed to each stage. On the surface, my husband and his indestructible head feels like a hilariously ironic line about Vision's death. But the more you look into it, the more depressing the line is. It's really Wanda living in denial. She's trying to convince herself that Vision never died. Another example of her living in denial is when she uses her powers to rewind back to the moment she revealed to be pregnant in an attempt to forget about the beekeeper, because just like the helicopters that showed up earlier in episode 2, it proved to be interfering with her reality. I actually even remember watching the first 2 episodes for the first time, and one of my first thoughts was that Wanda was just living in the denial stage, which proved to be right. As for the helicopter, beekeeper, and radio call, Wanda's inability to preserve her fantasy results in her becoming angry. The mentioning of Pietro's death by the hands of Ultron was merely the final straw that broke the camel's back, as Wanda sees Monica's presence in Westview as a threat because it brings up the grief that she's been trying to conceal. There's also a bit of anger when Wanda blasts fake Pietro after making a comment about Vision dying twice, which again is another reminder of her grief. Along with revealing that Wanda does in fact have some knowledge of creating the Hex, she even attempts to bargain with S.W.O.R.D. and offers leaving them alone if they leave her be. We also see her bargaining as she pushes her skepticism aside and accepts fake Pietro as her brother and consciously expanding the Hex to keep Vision alive. Wanda's depression is mainly focused throughout the entirety of episode 7 as she refuses to get out of bed and spirals out of control as she pretty much loses all control of her reality. Even the Nexus commercial pretty much spells out that Wanda's depressed before she's forced to relive all of her trauma in episode 8. Even though she's still heartbroken, the end of the show has Wanda come to terms with Vision's death as she goes and lives in a cabin by herself as she learns more about her powers and controlling them.
The first time I heard about the concept, I thought it was brilliant.
So yeah, those are my thoughts and opinions on WandaVision. Despite the issues I have, it's still a great show, and along with the Winter Soldier, Civil War, and Infinity War, it's proof that when they're committed, the MCU can be more than formulaic popcorn flicks. I really enjoy the sitcom episodes, and I also appreciate how each episode had a unique style and intro for each decade it was based around. It also helps that they had an actual audience for the sitcom episodes, along with the different aspect ratios, visual effects, and proper costume designing to look like the show was made during each specific decade. The commercials in the show were nice little references to specific events about Wanda's life. Another thing that makes the show great is the mystery angle, consisting of twists and turns that keep you on your feet along with subtle hints that something's not right. Just when you think you have all the answers, the show pulls you from under the rug as it presents new information and keeps you guessing and wanting more answers. Now, I do hope that Wanda's actions are properly acknowledged in future Marvel movies, because even though what Wanda did was a subconscious accident, people still got hurt, and I hope it isn't just swept under the rug or treated as a minor inconvenience. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and opinions about WandaVision. Thanks for watching.
Well, I think we handled that well.